The Last Line is a completely free podcast, but takes a lot of time, effort, and hard work to make happen. So if you'd like to support the show, then please head over to patreon.com/The Last Line. Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good whatever time you're listening to this podcast. My name is James Albarn, and you are listening to episode 18 of The Last Line. Thank you very much for joining me. This week features a conversation with a comedian and host of the Comedian's Comedian podcast, Stuart Goldsmith. I talked to Stuart earlier this year in a very loud and noisy and busy Curzon, Soho. It is a cinema, for those of you who don't know what the Curzon, Soho is. And we talked about all manner of things, including podcasting, stand-up comedy, and mental health. So, without further ado, here is Stuart, and we begin with Stuart giving me some podcasting advice.
Do you take a backup at all?
No.
From one podcaster to another, start taking a backup, even if it's just another one of them and another mic. Just duplicate the stuff, just in case one of them goes down. How many episodes have you done?
Oh, this is like, I'm still in this is like 13 or something.
Fine. Ignore my advice, and then somewhere down the line, maybe a year or two from now, you're going to lose an entire episode. You're going to think of this chat. You're going to go, why?
Okay, so
I've genuinely lost episodes in the past, and my backup has saved me.
This is a good place to start then. Because,
oh, we started. Nice.
Because I was a bit nervous coming to do this one.
Oh, okay. I'm a big scary guy.
Because you're like one of the podcasting titans, I think. You're like one of those big podcasters, right? So
if you mean I've been podcasting since before Serial, yes. If that's all that means, then yes, I'm the titan. Thank you, I suppose. I disagree with you entirely. I've been doing it for a while, and people really like the show that I do, and they really respect it, and then me by default. Yeah, but it's not. I mean, the titans are people like, Buxton and Herring and Deborah Francis White, and no such thing as a fish. People are on hundreds of millions of downloads. I'm not on 100 million downloads yet.
Wow. Anyway, I was still nervous, right? So,
well, I can really empathise with that because I get very nervous before interviews.
Well, so this is what I wanted to talk to you about, because I read something where you said that you get nervous before podcasts, and then just you then saying, do you take a backup without making you feel uncomfortable anyway, that made me go, oh shit, these I
profited immediately as friendly advice.
I know. But it I think going to talk to another person who's done podcasts a lot longer than me,
yes,
and does this sort of thing a lot more than me, there's a mix of it's a great chance for me just to get your wisdom.
Sure.
But also at the same time, it's kind of like I've got to up my game a bit because he's going to be looking at it from a...
Well, thank you. It's nice to think that you would think that. The downside of it, of course, is... Not the downside, the other side of it is that someone in my position has been interviewed hundreds of times, so you only need to be better than the average. And believe me, there have been some terrible interviews. I think it's quite funny to listen to interviews where the guest, the interviewee, is clearly a bit annoyed by how bad the interview is, and kind of listen out for them and go, oh, this guy's hating it, like that. Very rarely have I got annoyed in an interview. I have once or twice. but which is not to scare you at all. Like you've got a professional setup, you've got a very attractive mustard jacket, which is reasonably expensive. you know what you're doing.
So you lost a whole episode. How did that happen?
Oh, I have in the past. I've done nearly 300 episodes, and of those, I've lost 2 or 3 due to technical difficulties. I've lost one where I lost the beginning of a live one where the tech didn't press record.
Right.
He pressed record 10 minutes into it, and fortunately, I had a backup at the time. Tedious technical sort of things. I always make sure that I've got backup, even if it's just my phone, because it's heartbreaking to go through an interview with someone, and it's a journey if done well. It's a journey. You get to know each other. We'll be different people at the end of this hour, and not vastly different, but we'll have a sense of each other that we didn't have before, and that is the result of an organic and natural journey. And then, if you were to then say, "Oh shit, it didn't record. We've got to do it again." Even if we had the time and everything, we couldn't replicate it, and it would be forced and it would be stilted. Like pre-interview, I always try to make sure that I don't tread on the toes of the interview. I'm forever saying to my guests, don't tell me, I'm about to say, how are you, how have you been, how was last night's gig? And I have to say, we can't talk about anything that we might reasonably start with, so tell me what films you've seen recently. And they go, and invariably, someone says, oh, I saw this, and within 10 seconds we're talking about last night's gig or how we are or something. I'm like, no. I think Pete Holmes, when he did You Made It Weird, he used to make a feature of arriving at someone's house with the gear already recording, so that he could walk in, clip a mic on them, and then just continue chatting, so that they would start on the off, because it's it is an organic, a natural and real thing, and it's very easy to fuck that up with a tiny misstep, and actually you put it's all like it's like a flirtation, it's like a date. Forgive me for making this weird as I take you to the cinema. But it is, I think a lot of professional relationships in my life, relationships with managers, with gig bookers, with podcast guests or gatekeepers or whoever, it is analogous to a date, it's analogous to a flirty relationship. Well, business negotiation, it's basically just about going, you're you and I'm me, and this could work out, but it could easily, we could sour it. You know what I mean? It's the relationship is a very tangible, living thing. It's such a long answer. I'm sorry, man. I'll go on and on.
No, that's great. So just to go back to, without having you relive the pain of losing an episode. So did you, when you have lost an episode, like a whole episode before, have you got them back to redo it, or because how do you broach that conversation? Yes,
well, let me see. I've been on the receiving end of it very recently. I was on Barbara Nice's podcast. Barbara Nice is a fantastic comedian based in Birmingham. She's an older lady, and she's very, very funny and really inhabits her character. It is a character, but you'd be hard pressed to tell. It's very subtly heightened. It's great. And we did like a half-hour thing. I guested on her podcast, her radio show, in fact. And then we realised immediately, oh, hang on a minute, shouldn't that light be? Oh God, we had to redo the whole thing. I didn't want to. I wanted to go and see Spider-Man because I'm a dad of 2 children. I wanted to see the Spider-Man film while I was away from home. But I'd worked out all the timings very carefully to make the most of my tiny little sliver of free time. But I also had a sense of like, oh, we can't just redo it. And then I didn't put my foot down or anything. We just went, oh, what should we do? We'll do it another time. And then we kind of got up and went outside and stretched our legs. And I think we both said, this is crazy. Let's just go back in and do it now.
Right.
And we had a similarly interesting conversation, but every time it touched upon one of the things from the lost one, we'd feel the need to retread it a little bit and kind of pay lip service to the fact that actually we had a great chat about this 2 minutes ago, which you're never going to hear. And it just meant that it was sort of stagey somehow.
Yeah. My first podcast, that's maybe when I should have realised I needed a backup. Like my third podcast in recording, I just forgot to hit record the first 20 minutes of it.
Yeah.
And I think what you should do at that point is maybe just sneakily hit record and without telling them. I don't know. Because immediately I went, shit.
Yeah. And it's kind of a diss to your guest as well, isn't it? When you worry that it is, you might perceive, you're like, oh God, they think I'm hopeless now.
Yeah, exactly.
You could have done it subtly. Yeah. Always, probably yes, in hindsight, that was the best way to do it. Is this a build-up? Are you telling you definitely?
So I read on the way in, because I've been going down a Goldsmith rabbit hole.
Sure.
I read on the way that you.
I can't believe I just said sure as if to suggest.
Sure.
Of course you did.
Sure.
There's so
Yeah,
much gearing
yeah.
up there. Cool, I'm very good. There's so much stuff on me. Sorry, that's ridiculous. I was actually thinking to myself, the thought I had was, is there enough stuff out there for a rabbit hole? There must be. I'm 41. Do you know what I mean? I've been doing things for long enough that there is a legitimate rabbit hole. So it's probably not a particularly deep one. Sorry, go on.
It's all right. I saw an interview, and I'm not sure how long ago it was. I feel like it was fairly recent. But you touched upon how you felt like you'd reached a sort of plateau with your podcast, and you were sort of toying with the idea of like, do I carry this on?
Yeah, I suppose I often have that in the back of my mind, because the last thing you should do as a podcaster is ever look at the download numbers.
Yeah.
And
Which I do every
of
day.
course you do. It's hard not to. But you shouldn't. It's like when I was a street performer. You shouldn't count what's in your hat. You should count it at the end of the month and put it in the bank.
Right.
You shouldn't count it on an individual basis, because then you end up feeling like there's a relationship between how good you were that day and the money you made, and that seems to me to be contrary to an artistic aspiration.
Sure.
And similarly, looking at the download numbers, like it doesn't. They're almost never accurate, because how do you work out who listened to how much of it? And also, you've no idea, there's no metric for how much a thing resonated with someone. We don't have data. iTunes doesn't have data on that. Sorry, Apple Podcasts, as they rebranded. No one has data on how much it resonated with someone. No one has data on the life-changing difference one particular offhand comment made to someone. So so I made the mistake, and frequently make the mistake, of looking at the numbers and going, oh, it was sort of like I started very quickly. I had quite early success. I remember the first time I looked at the little ticker and went, 1,000 downloads, fucking hell. And now I've had like almost 11 million. It's not the same as 11 million fans, but it's a chunky word. It's quite nice to have a million of something.
Yeah.
But I suppose, as I was getting into podcasts, I wasn't first wave by any means. Like, people were, WTF had been around for years before I started my show. But I think after I started and had been going for a few years, podcasting had we're in the golden age at the moment, maybe, or something. It's another explosion. People are doing startups and they're being sold for hundreds of millions of dollars. And it'll be very interesting to see what happens. Certainly what I've seen happen during my career as a podcaster is the moment when the BBC and every other radio station thought, well, we've got all this content, we may as well also podcast it. Consequently, I can't get in the top 50 rankings, because it used to be podcasting was just indies. It was just people like me going, here's my show, here's the thing, sink or swim. Adam and Joe obviously were doing it from BBC Six Music, but I think that was because they'd said, let's podcast this.
Yeah.
But now everyone making anything may as well podcast it, because it costs next to nothing. Suddenly I've seen it turn from something into YouTube. I just don't know what the something is. You know the way YouTube, like comics go, I'm going to make a video, I'm going to put it on YouTube, and you're like, sure. You realise what that means is I'm going to throw it in the sea. Do you know what I mean? It's not going to get seen by anyone unless you've crafted or have some kind of plan for it. So I've seen that happen. So probably while I was feeling a bit down about it, I went through a period of the numbers going up and then plateauing a bit, because actually the space is so crowded now.
I must apologise.
The
intruders into the space.
But this is another street performing thing. We used to run effectively a protection racket at Covent Garden. You had to audition for your street show licence.
Right.
You had to show that you were up to a certain standard, supposedly, and actually, it was a kind of there were two different types of mentality. One was that this place is the Olympics, this should be only for the very best street performers. And the other mentality, to which I certainly subscribe, was this is the street, it belongs to everyone, that's the point. So podcasting belongs to everybody. So I'm not annoyed that other people start their things. Of course, there's a tiny grubby part of it, like rats. But I do think it's part of the glory of it is it's for everyone, and that's a big core value of mine, even when I'm feeling grubby.
Yeah, but I think I've gone through that. Like, even though there's only, as we record this, there's only 10 episodes out at the moment, and I've already gone through when I see a big celebrity start a podcast.
Yeah.
I go,
think you're cheating. You're already famous.
Well, it's not for you.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's probably a ridiculous thought to have. But when you can get like Ed Sheeran in your first episode,
Yeah.
not that I necessarily that fussed about having
Apparently
Ed
he's
Sheeran.
lovely.
Apparently lovely guy. But you know, when you can get you kind of feel like it's cheating a little bit.
Yes.
And I that's probably a silly feeling to have. But
Well, the answer is, I suppose, that's a reasonable thing to feel, and it's a reasonable thing to get over pretty quickly if you can.
Yes.
You know, I mean,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
absolutely know what you mean. But anyone who's in that position would think, well, I've cheated by already being excellent at something that I practiced hard at somewhere else. What, I cheated? Do you know what I mean? I worked really hard to get a profile, and now I'm using that profile in a way.
exactly.
You know, I mean, it's kind of ridiculous. I've always thought that about Richard Herring, who I love. But I feel like he started Richard Herring's Leicester Square podcast literally 2 weeks after I started ComCom.
Right.
And it particularly irks me because there's like someone made an offhand comment on it on my Facebook page about how we all know Stu's basically copying Herring. And I'm like, check the fucking Wikipedia page. But I think he's great. What he does is great. But I have always, in the back of my mind, I'm like, he's cheated because he was already famous because I used to watch him on the radio. Yeah, what got him famous? Consistently turning out a high volume of really excellent work that I love.
Exactly,
He's like,
yeah.
okay. Well, we could all cope.
But your podcasts are like very different. You're like a very analytical, like I like Richard Herring's podcast and like your podcast, but like Richard
Sure.
Herring is like
We're not competing for the same
fun time.
territory.
So, but what I wanted to ask you about is because you do like a very analytical podcast and it's about comedy, but it's not like necessarily interested in being funny, although there have been some
Sure, some of the
very
episodes
funny
are
moments.
funny, yeah.
But then you'll do a live show sometimes of it, like you'll do it at the Fringe or you do it at the Soho Theatre. And is there, when you're doing it live as opposed to just like at someone's house, or do you feel like a different sort of pressure, or do you feel like you have to take a different approach because there are people in front of you? Are you conscious like, we should make them laugh a bit, or
I don't,
Do you
but
worry
my
about
guest
that?
invariably does.
right?
My guest invariably... No, not invariably. My guest very often... You can't help, we're comics, we can't help but be aware there's an audience there. And I try to ignore them. I don't look at them. And I say to my guests before, and I'm not going to look at them. They're just here. They want to be here. Great.
Yeah.
I'm just going to try and have what they want. The thing they hear at home that made them come here is just you and me looking at each other having a chat. But my guest is a comic, and I can't help riffing slightly more, and they certainly can't help riffing more, or getting 20 minutes in. And the classic thing is 20 minutes in, my live guest will go, they'll turn to the audience and go, is this all right? Because for a comic to be on stage talking for 10 minutes, 5 minutes, 3 minutes without any laughter is a weird experience, and it's triggering all the nerves that you've built up over years that say, oh, I'm bombing. And you're not bombing because it's a different thing.
Right.
So they often... I think of extreme ends of it. Like Sindhu V was on my show recently, and she's very measured and calm and mature, and was happy to be funny, but happy to have a real conversation with me. And at the other end of the scale, Phil Jupiters, brilliant guest, really lovely man, said some very erudite things. It's this thing about, the thing that sticks in my mind particularly, he said, when people insult you on Twitter, if you could see their handwriting, you wouldn't give it a second thought. Like it's full of real gems. But at the same time with Phil, there's an audience there, and he is such a live performer. If you say to Phil, how do you write your jokes? He'll say, right, 1968, I saw The Clash, and you go, okay, we're into an anecdote that you clearly, you've told before, and it's the appropriate one. But I'm not digging into. It's a harder job for me to go to sort of. I think of it like a chocolate orange. You have to sort of tap them on the head so they open. So I'm miming there, and it's an excellent mime, but it's lost on the listener. So I just have to attack it a different way. But it's harder. And these days I book far fewer live ones. I'll do them if someone particularly asks or particularly wants one, or it's a particularly good deal.
Yeah.
But they're not my favourite thing because a lot of my nerves are heightened when it's live. I get genuinely big anxiety before every podcast interview, sometimes for days before it, which is completely unnecessary and ludicrous. But I get it, and I can't seem to stop getting it. And that is much more the case if it's a live one.
But as someone who's only done a handful compared to you, it's quite encouraging that you do get anxiety before every. I mean, it's not great for you, but it's good for me because I certainly have that sort of anxiety level before doing a podcast.
Sure.
I'm always worried about, have I researched enough? what are we going to talk about? And
What if I dry? What if I can't think of anything to say?
Yeah.
What if I can't think of my next question? I interviewed Hannibal Buress, and a brilliant American comic, and he just has this habit of answering questions, and at the end of his answers he'll say, and that's that. And I go, oh God, you know what I mean? Like, that was terrifying in front of a live audience. And his own camera crew who were filming a documentary of him. It was really scary. So few of them, in hundreds and hundreds of episodes, so few of them have gone bad like that. And yet I still have this terrible fear of asking David Baddiel if he's ever thought about writing a film, and he goes, well, I won an award for my film writing. Do you know what I mean? It's that sort of something that shows me up to be an imposter. It's classic imposter syndrome. I'm not supposed to know everything about my guest. It would be pointless if I knew everything about my guest. All I'm looking for is to have a conversation with someone. And I think if someone was interviewing me as a stand-up and said, have you ever thought about doing a podcast? I wouldn't go, are you for real? Who the fuck do you think you are? I'd go, oh mate, yeah, I do one, you'd love it. And I'd enjoy telling them about it because they'd be a fresh person to it. So there is no way anyone reasonable could behave as nastily to me as I imagine, as like my kind of pseudo version of them in my head would behave. But,
have you had those experiences where someone has?
Oh, very rarely, very, very rarely. Sean Hughes.
Right.
What is it you say? God rest his soul. I'm not religious. What do you say to Sean Hughes? Bracket expression of something.
Condolence that he
died.
I think people do say God rest his soul.
Well, they do, but it's a bit. It's not really me. But Sean Hughes, yes, the dead one. That doesn't seem right either, does it? But excellent comic and tortured poet and troubled man and interesting conversational guest. I found him very prickly and difficult to interview. Certainly at the beginning of the interview I said, so Sean, why don't you tell us what your current Edinburgh show's about? And he said, well, you've seen it, why don't you tell me? And I was like, okay. And I was glad I had done loads of research. I had seen it, I had read a bunch of reviews and kind of got other opinions on it. And I said, well, I think it's about this, this and this. And he went, no, you've totally misunderstood. And I was like, okay, this is all in minute one. So that was tricky, but it wasn't awful. And something good came of it. A good interview came out of it in the end. And my listeners are my listeners, and if they hear me struggling, then they'll forgive me. You know what I mean? The worst thing you can do is go, oh my God, I genuinely didn't realise you'd written a film, Mr. Baddiel. Tell me about your film, I'm such an idiot, I don't know. And he'll tell you about the film. There's nothing, and anyone who's being a prick to you is being a prick. Do you know what I mean? There's no one is so famous or above, no one's above manners. Do you know what I mean? Like, you think they are, but actually if someone was, Russell Brand, I sort of put a foot wrong with Russell Brand early doors.
I was about to mention that.
Yeah, what did I say? I put it to him, I said something like, the first thing he said was, I'm gone back to college, I'm doing a degree in political science or something, political studies. And I said words to the effect that it was that decision in part so that when you got into weighty arguments, you could fight your ground better. And I think he interpreted that as, hey, remember all those big public losses you've had? Which isn't how I remembered it. And obviously, I don't think of them as a big component of him. Probably he does. Maybe he obsesses about them. I have no idea. And so I had to then immediately, he got very upset early doors, and I was like, oh shit, he might walk out the interview that I've prepped for weeks, and that I've got 2 hours of his time in this one-off thing, So that was, again, all I did was I just said, oh, I'm really sorry. I didn't mean to suggest that. I should apologise, sorry. And then walked back round it and got to another place. But, I might have touched a nerve there, and I think he, in particular, has been very publicly excoriated in the past, and, probably I should have trod more carefully. But
it's interesting you say that you felt like he was about to walk away from the interview, because I didn't.
No, that was my fear.
impression.
I don't think he was about to, but I had a big fear response of going, oh fuck, he might walk out, shit.
Yeah. But that wouldn't have been like from listening to it, and again, it's about how our minds are just anxiously working away in the background, because when I listened to it, all I heard was him going, oh.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It wasn't. It was less of like.
Yeah, sure. But then you're hearing a thing. You know it all ends well.
Yeah.
Because there's 2 hours of tape on you. Do you know what I mean? You've seen the numbers. You know. I didn't preface that episode by going, holy shit, guys. You know what I mean? So you've got a certain expectation of it. Whereas me, in the moment, as the interviewer, wanting to do this very pretentiously articulated live organic relationship between us, like, oh shit, that's like, if it is like having sex with someone, that's, oh Christ, I've accidentally bitten her on the eye. Do you know what I mean? It's like, you're like, oh God, I didn't mean to do that, and how is this going to affect what happens next? So it's very different in the moment.
Have you heard the WTF episode where I think it's the comedian Gallagher?
Gallagher walks out. No, I downloaded that. I haven't got around to this.
It's worth listening. I think someone's like clipped out the 15 minutes or something where it actually sort of all happens. But I was impressed listening to that. Mark Maron is like a completely different human to me, because he's just like, what are you doing? Why are you walking out? Yeah, come on. Yeah. Whereas I'd be like, oh my God.
Oh God, I fucked up. Yeah.
So that's
I think that's one of the strengths of a great strength of what Mark Maron does, is that he is long enough in the tooth as he's lived a life and has a particular attitude towards a particular attitude and a particular status. And those things really feed into what he does. I try to be invisible in my episodes. I sort of don't know why, but I noticed I was doing it and I thought, I think this works, I'll do it more. So I try to ask a question and then really listen. And if my next question can simply be me raising my eyebrows, then so much the better, because I think people share more when there's space for them to do so. If you do the right tap and then you just sit back. I'm forever talking about I saw this recently on YouTube, but there's a brilliant interview with Parkinson's interview with George Michael, where George Michael has just crashed a Range Rover into a chip shop, and because he was high behind the wheel or something, and basically Parkinson says to him, "Please welcome George Michael." They sit down and he goes, "George, what happened?" And that's it. And George just goes for it. Do you know what I mean? And I like it's not. I've seen it, and it's not actually like someone described it to me like that. I was like, nice. I've seen it. It's not exactly like that, but it's pretty much like that, and I think that's a good thing to aspire to.
Yeah, because I'm trying to do that more, of just letting people talk. I think there is also a fear that you're gonna do the raise your eyebrows as the next question, or whatever, and then they just don't talk.
Yeah, but look, you edit it and make yourself look like a hero.
The thing, editing, but I'm never anxious about like the actual, like how the episode's going to turn out. If you see what I mean?
Yeah, it's about the human who's looking at you right now.
I'm worried that Stuart Goldsmith is going to walk away going, "Oh, he's
what a prick." Yeah.
And
toughen up. I don't know. I don't know. I experience exactly the same thing myself. Normally, as soon as the interview starts, I relax and I go, "Oh God, you're just a human." Normally, 9 times out of 10. But I don't know what the solution is. I'm sure there is some quick. The thing I'm always looking for is the anxiety equivalent of the Alan Carr "Easy Way to Stop Smoking" book. This is not Alan Carr the comedian; it's a different Alan Carr.
Right.
It's called "The Easy Way to Stop Smoking," and it's NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, by another name. And it's a book. You read it and you just don't want to be a smoker anymore. And it changed my life 20 years ago. It's great. 15 years ago maybe, I just stopped smoking overnight whilst reading the book. And I'm sure there must be something out there which is the equivalent for anxiety. There must be some simple switch, there must be some phrase that someone can say to you. Just think of it like this, bang, and it just goes. If any of your listeners know what that is, please hook me up.
I watched I rewatched the Richard Herring podcast that you were on.
Sure.
And there's a bit where because one of the questions you often end up asking is, "Are you happy?" That's kind of like a regular thing with you. And then you mentioned that, I can't remember which comedian always asks you as like a joke, this is like 3 years ago on the show, so I'm expecting you to remember.
Are we podcasting about podcasting? Go on.
But I think Richard Herring ends up throwing the question to you. In that thing, and you mentioned that you were a lot happier than you used to be, and you'd been going to a lot of therapy. And without sort of wanting to sort of dive into the things you discuss in therapy, just the idea of going to therapy, I think, is quite interesting, and it's not really something I've talked about on the podcast before. It's just interesting for me to talk to someone who has been to therapy as an idea, because it was certainly something that has been suggested to me in the past. When my mum was ill, like the school we're definitely trying to make me go, and I was just very sort of resistant to the whole idea. So it'd just be quite interesting to talk to someone who has.
Yeah. Okay. Well, where to begin? Where to begin? What's the most useful thing I can say about it? I suppose. Okay. So I've been in and out of therapy. And what I mean by that is I've never been sectioned, I've never been in an institution, but I have had occasional weekly or fortnightly, I've had relationships with various therapists of various different types.
But it seems, I think why I'm asking as well is because it seems like quite a common thing amongst the artistic community to do therapy. There's sort of Woody Allen was always doing therapy.
Sure,
it's kind
of.
of.
I think it's a fairly common thing amongst the non-artistic community. It's just we don't hear about what they get up to.
Probably.
I think that's true with loads of mental health things. I think comics talk about mental health all the time because we talk all the time. And I think, you don't know if your postman's been to therapy because you never get the chance to find out. Whereas if I have been to therapy, great, I might get 5 minutes out of this.
Yeah,
so,
I suppose that's
I'm a big believer in that. I think therapy is there for everyone.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting that some people are resistant to it. I suppose that's because they don't know what it is. Like, I understand much more when people are resistant to antidepressants, say. I've never been on those. I know people who have, and I have nothing against them. And I know lots of people who say, who kind of, there'll be internet memes going around of like, hey, just go out for a walk in the sunshine, you don't need pills, man. And the answer is always like, fuck you. Like, you've got no idea of the things I'm dealing with, the kind of brain chemistry things. So, anyway, I first had some therapy. I had some CBT, some cognitive behavioural therapy when I was it was after college, so I must have been 20, 21, and I was staying with a mate, and his girlfriend was training to be a CBT therapist at the time, and she had left a book full of case studies, and I idly picked it up and flicked through it one morning while someone was in the shower, and I just had a little look through it, and I looked at a case study and I went, oh shit, that's me. Literally the voice of this person going, this is an example of someone who's got blah, blah, blah. And they were saying some stuff, and I went, I think all of that stuff. And that was when I first went, that's... So I had like the best possible way into it, where you literally look at like an insider manual. Some people think this. I went, snap. Oh, right, I should probably do this. So I did lots of CBT with a couple of different people. I suppose I was lucky. I had no dependents at the time, and I had a very hand-to-mouth cash economy because I was a street performer. So even if it was like 40 or 50 quid for an hour, I thought to myself, I'm going to pay that. And that was a very privileged position to be in. I didn't. You can get it on the National Health Service, but there's a big wait, and then you only get 6. I was just like, no, this is as important as having the lights on. So I'm going to, focus on that. And I mean, I'm not sure I'm the best person to sort of describe what CBT is. I suppose my experience of it is, in very short form, all therapy is basically just talking to a person. It's like talking to a mate of yours because there's a financial transaction, you don't need to listen to their problems. They can just listen to yours. God, it's great. I'd recommend it to anyone. It's fantastic. Just having someone, like the only person in the world who literally will not judge you at all for anything, and just being able to talk, to spiel at them, at its very simplest level. You say a load of stuff, and I would find all the time I'd say a thing and go, oh God, I mean that. Yeah, that's what I think. I had never articulated it before, but just saying it out loud to someone who's a blank slate, who's not judging me at all, and is listening in the right way, and can stop you or slow you down or go, just say that again, just kind of divert you. I found that very useful. So CBT is very much like a typical thing would be, you write down a list of all your automatic negative thoughts. Oh, I've been thinking this about my mum or this about my job. And you write them all down, and then you attack them all logically. There's basically, 12 or 14 typical thinking errors that people make, like minimizing the positive stuff, maximizing the negative stuff, or saying I should do this, I should want that. So someone's isolated all these different things, and you apply them as a net to the kind of logical, you attack your negativity with logic. And if you do that often enough, you just get very good at doing it automatically. So you quiet down those negative thoughts. That's broadly it, in a way where it isn't really it, but that's the thing. And then I found that good in the short term. It would always pick me back up and get me going, but it didn't really address. I would always end up sad again, or depressed again, or anxious again. And it was only years later, I don't know what, must be 7 years ago maybe, I discovered Gestalt psychotherapy, which is much more like you and a person just talking, and then we did lots of kind of inhabiting. He put 3 different chairs in the room and go, right, when you're feeling like your most positive you, sit on that one, and when you're feeling really negative, sit on that one, and when you're feeling like something else, sit on that one, and just kind of role play, okay, well, let's look at this problem, your relationship, or this problem, your desire to have children, or this problem, your job. Sit on each chair and tell me how you feel about it from each of those perspectives. And that just cracked me open like an egg, and suddenly I was like, then you start to realise the relationship between them, and actually there's a part of me which is sort of desperate to be loved and accepted, and there's a part of me that is really hard on myself, and there's a relationship between those two that if I overdo it in trying to be loved and accepted and make some sort of mistake, I'll be really negative towards myself, and when I do that, then in reaction to that, I'll break off into this other scared little boy kind of persona that was a bit bullied and react. Do you know what I mean? It's like I'm doing lots of gestural work. I'm leaning in for the mic. I'm doing lots of gestural work here, which isn't useful to the listener. But recognising the different angles from which you're coming mentally, the different voices with which you speak to yourself, recognising what they are in a very honest and truthful way, and then recognising the relationship between them and how one affects the other, is just an incredibly useful way of going, oh, I think all of that stuff.
And have you found that doing that and having that understanding of the way your own mind works, have you found that helps in applying it to? Just the war on drugs just came on very loud. Applying it to when you're interviewing someone.
I don't know. I understand the question. I don't know. I suppose so. I guess
it's a subconscious thing, right? But
well, my pet theory about why my interviews seem to be so impactful to people is that I think I have a lot of empathy, and so I'm quite good at guessing what it is that people are worried about. So I can look at my guest and think, if I was them, I'd be worried about this, that, and that.
Right.
And so as a result, that kind of helps me say, hey, if I was you right now, I'd be thinking this. And they go, yeah, I suppose I do. So I feel like that's part of it. So it's that. I'm quite good at listening. So I don't know. I'm just, I'm good at putting myself in other people's shoes, I think. Just enough to be able to go, cool, it's probably a bit like that, isn't it? And people, I'm often right, and people go, yeah. And then I'm good at being quiet and letting them finish that thought and sort of see where that goes. So maybe there's some therapeutic framework in place there, or maybe it's just a parallel. Like I remember when my Gestalt guy, when he said, we're going to try this thing with chairs, he actually said, this doesn't work with everyone, Stu, but I think you're going to go for it. No, he was absolutely right. I really enjoyed it. I wish I'd taped all the sessions, because I said some really funny, honest things where we both fell about. And I was like, fuck, I've got to write it down. No. Stick with the thought for the sake of the therapy. So I suppose there is on some level, the two things are intertwined.
Yes, and it's interesting you say that, and you may have just been saying it as an example, but you said about how there's an eager to please, and you said another thing as well. But
there's like a really stern critic of myself.
Yeah,
and they each have good and bad qualities.
And you often hear people who do comedy say the same thing, and it seems to be a feeling that a lot of comedians have.
Well, again, a lot of people, we all want to be loved.
Yeah.
We all want to be loved, but comics are used to standing on stage and saying what's true off the top of their head over and over again. So your postman wants to be loved, but you never know, unless he starts sending you particular gifts.
Because I've just started doing stand-up.
Okay.
So
We need more white guys. I'm joking. I'm sorry. There's nothing personal whatsoever.
Yes, we need more privately educated white guys. But I've just done like my sort of first few open mic gigs. So I'm very early on, and a lot of my stuff is sort of semi-character stuff.
I'm smiling because you just said a lot of my stuff as if you have an oeuvre, but I'm not. No, I'm not. This is a mean thing to be smiling at. Of course it's relevant and in the forefront of your mind. And I felt exactly like that when I'd done less than 10 gigs or whatever.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, the thing about my gear is,
a lot of the stuff that I have done on stage.
I'm sorry, I'm being mean. I totally get where you're coming from.
But I'm sort of doing like semi-character sort of stuff. So, and just hearing you talk about therapy there and my reluctance to have done any of that in my past, and you talking about exposing yourself on stage, and I wonder if there's a correlation between me not wanting to sort of be me on stage and also not deal with emotions as well.
You've just been Goldsmith. I would say there is absolutely some sort of relationship with those things. I personally think, and I'm very loath, I know you've not asked for stand-up advice or anything like that, but I'm very loath to give people my own singular opinion, because I just think the worst thing you can do for a newer act is to tell them this is how it's supposed to be, you should do this, it should be like this. Well, again, it's a should statement, it's another sort of mental health thing. But, who knows what surprises are within you? Who knows what magic, what new perspective on the whole idea of comedy is within any given new act? So what right does anyone have to go, you should be a bit more like so-and-so, you should be a bit more like what I want to see? It's nonsense, Having said that, I do think that certainly the comedy I like to see that resonates most with me are when I can see someone being true to themselves on stage. That can be within a character, as long as they are speaking of a truth, some aspect of their genuine essence. And that's it. There is no way to talk about it without it being wanky, but you can look at people and go, that person is who that is. Rod Gilbert's anger is something he struggles with daily, and he unleashes it on stage, and that's probably good for him.
Yeah.
Because I don't mean that it has a therapeutic effect, but you recognise that it's real. Most comics I would say who are very good have tapped into the things about them that they would rather not put out there, and they've gone, there's a comic called Liam Malone, who is I think a very fine comic, a very interesting and funny comic. He said years ago that to write his new show, he just wrote a list of all the things he couldn't bear to imagine saying in public, and that was all his stuff.
Right.
It was like, oh God, that's how you write a show. So certainly if you sense a reticence to talking about your problems with someone, then it may benefit you on stage at some point in the next 5 years. It's not going to happen overnight.
Yeah.
If you get over that, or maybe you don't do it in a therapeutic context, maybe you just get used to, maybe you, as an exercise, go on stage at some gig where no one knows you and say, I desperately don't want to tell you the following 8 true things about myself. And just do it. Just have a big creative shit and get it off your chest. And what you'll probably realise is, it doesn't matter. Maybe 1 or 2 of them, you'll go, oh, fucking hell, that's a good bit there. Yeah. I'm only just now, 13 years into stand-up, I'm only just getting finding what the right gear feels like to stand on stage and honestly, without having prepped or written it, say, I think life's a bit like this. Silence. Don't run away from it, Stu, stay in it. I think it's like this, because when I'm ever like this, I behave like this. Silence. And I sort of do that, a bit of a laugh, great, don't run away from it, don't stop now that they're laughing, stay in it, take the risk of that awful pregnant silence, they're not laughing at the moment, stay with what's truest and just start to get there. Literally in the last year I've started finally getting to that I feel like, oh, that's maybe this is day one, you know?
Because I've only just got into Stuart Lee actually. Like only really recently I've suddenly got Stuart Lee, and I think that's come from before. I was just watching like little clips of him on YouTube, and then I finally just like watched the whole show, and I think I got him a lot more because I saw the whole thing. But he does that very well. Of like he doesn't care. Well, he probably does internally, but he doesn't seem to care whether the audience are laughing or not, and I think it is having that confidence just to be caught up in your own thing on stage rather than worrying about what. Would you say that's true, or?
I think the thing about Stuart is difficult. Stuart Lee is one of the geniuses of comedy, you know. So it's very difficult to apply any lessons from observing him to oneself. I think one of the things when you talk about I suddenly got him, I think what there is for people to get that people either don't get or do get is that it's all in inverted commas. It's all him playing with the idea of what you think a comedian is supposed to be. And if you don't register that as a level, if you're not understanding on that level, then a lot of it works anyway, but some of it will annoy or frustrate you, you know. When he refers to himself as the metropolitan liberal elite, you know, you either can take that at face value or take it as like he's sardonically playing with that description of what he does, or take it as like it makes sense for him, for his character to describe himself as that in order to set up an antagonism between him and people who are his paying fans. You know, he has to, the more successful he gets, the harder it must be to continue setting up this antagonism and this idea that his audience are too slow for him or don't deserve him or don't get it, but without simply saying that outright. Yeah, so there's that, and then what was the question? What you asked
about not being concerned with what the audience are doing and focusing just on your own thing and what they do is almost irrelevant. It's not irrelevant because obviously they've got to laugh at some point, but being confident in the idea that you know where you're going and not to worry about.
Yeah, or confident in the idea that you don't know where you're going and it's fine to be exploring.
Okay.
It's fine to be exploring and them not laughing, you know. Look, at the end of the day, it's not about giving them what they want. It's about giving them what they don't know they want. So you can't, if you want to be led by them laughing, that's a clowning kind of way, is that if they laugh, go towards it, do more. Similarly, you might need to be in the shit for a long time. You might need to have no one laughing for years to crack what it is. But then all that time, all those years, how do you know if you're not just deluded? It's a nightmare, you know. It is. That's because it's art. If you think of someone like Picasso. If you just look at all his, I don't know the term, but cubism is it? I don't know. Like when he does faces that are all over the place. You don't look at those and think, oh, he can't paint, you know. but he got there through being a brilliant painter of regular stuff and then taking it to bits. Stuart Lee got to where he is by being a brilliant joke writer and joke deliverer and taking it to bits. And a lot of people starting out now trying to go straight to Stuart Lee, which they're making the mistake of trying to be like someone, which Stuart Lee never did. You know, anyone who's one of the people, they weren't trying to be like one of the people. They were, you know, was it Bruce Lee said, if you see a finger point to the moon, try and be like the moon, don't be like the finger. Yeah.
Have you ever struggled with wanting to be like someone?
Yeah, all the time. I hear echoes of people's. I'm very analytical, and so I'm quite keenly attuned to it. I hear echoes of people in my voice all the time.
Because especially as someone who's like talking to comedians all the time and really like deep diving into their stuff all the time, it must. Do you ever find yourself when you're writing new material or going, oh no, I'm actually doing that thing?
There's a bit in my current show where I'm looking through the letterbox of a night pay window at a garage, asking the bloke to poke the different croissants to try and find the freshest pain au chocolat, and that can get a bit Stuart Lee sometimes because it's a small, silly mind that I'm staying in it for a long time.
Yeah.
It's a bit Eddie Izzard as well because I'm staying in a thing for a long time. So I need to keep reminding myself not to, if it starts sounding like that, get away from it. It could be seen as that.
Right.
And that is I make myself a particular target for criticism because I'm the guy that's spoken to all the comedians. If you see me doing it, it's very easy to go,
Do you get that? Do people
I
do
don't
that?
know because I don't read my reviews, but
Right.
I always imagine that's the
Have you
sort of
ever
thing
read
people
your
would say.
Have you ever
Yes.
read your reviews?
Yes, I have.
And at what point did you go, I'm not going to do the same?
After a particularly excellent one where I thought, I can't keep doing this to myself. No. No, over the last few years, I gradually stopped because I was always in awe of people who never read their reviews, because reviews aren't aimed at the comic. The worst thing you can do as a reviewer is to write the review in the hope that the comic will see it.
Right.
Because it's not for us. It's not. You know what I mean? It's like
Yeah.
It's not your job as a reviewer to steer my art. How dare you? Do you know what I mean? But I think I really get the sense with some reviews that they are written in the hope that the comic sees it, and to me that's the most mealy-mouthed kind of, excuse me, Mr. High up on a pedestal, actually it'd be better if you did this. I think decent criticism is next to impossible to write, because what can you say apart from they did this and I thought this?
Yeah.
Brackets, I'm one person. It doesn't matter what I think, you know.
Yeah.
So for all my bitching about it, and also I would be sometimes quite negatively affected by it. I have imposter syndrome more than the next person maybe. So I've tried to phase them out. I stopped reading all reviews, but then for the podcast I do need to read reviews sometimes from people who are coming up. So it'd be good to stop reading all of them. It would be good to stop reading them at all. But it is a sort of a quiet power to go, okay, I know there are reviews over the last 2 years that I've never read and I never will. And I don't know that I never will. Every so often I think, well, maybe it'd be useful to see what some articulate people think of it. But maybe it wouldn't be useful. So I'd rather press on doing my thing. At the end of the day, you're you and you've got your life, and what's the point? What's the point in hearing? I do think when someone heckles, and I'm sure the same is true with a review, when someone heckles, they are offering you some information. They're offering you two things. One is a description of what they see or fail to see. It's useful to know that. And it's attached to another thing, like a little molecule. There's another thing added on, which is like a message about you being a dick, or they hate you, or they like you, or whatever.
Yeah.
And if you can split the two apart and go, well, let's forget the subjective bit and look at the objective bit and go, oh, you, any random person, thought this bit was too dense. Some bloke shouted at me, what are you talking about? You're talking and talking, but what are you talking about? And he was attacking the show because he was frustrated, but really, in the cold light of day, that message, the useful molecule of that, said, this is too dense for me to understand, I don't know what's going on.
Right.
And that's useful to know that people think that. So probably in the same way, a piece of criticism, like if you separate all of the opinion out of it and just go, oh, this person saw that, and then they understood that, and then they saw that, that would be quite useful, potentially. But it would be no more useful than any punter saying anything.
So, for instance, that heckler, if you go, oh, okay, so he's not understood that because that's too dense, do you then go away and make it less dense?
No,
or?
that would be patronising. I don't change based on the will of the audience. I do what I do because it's me that has to do it night after night. And
it's just because you said it's useful to know that information.
Well, no. Okay, so he was too drunk to understand that. I don't want to work at the level of the drunkest person in the room.
Sure.
So it is useful to know. That's a really good question, actually. You've pointed out a logical inconsistency there. How can I backpedal my way out of this? Yeah, I mean, it is. If that sort of thing were to happen over and over again, I'd have to go, this sentence is too dense.
Yeah, but one person you're like.
But one person, I sort of go, well, I do think it would be patronising to tweak what you do in order that everybody understands it. You know, there's a thing in comics where a lot of people say, I want to be able to work every room. And to me, that's a little bit, I get that. And you should be able to change gear to an extent. But I also think that if you are a singer who can sing any kind of song, if you can do opera and jazz and heavy metal and whatever, if you can do all of them, then you're a lounge singer. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's not something I aspire to be. I don't think I should. I used to want to be able to play any gig. I'm a street performer. I'm very adaptable. I've played ludicrously different, high-end, low-end kind of things.
Yeah.
And I particularly have a problem with this because I naturally tend towards it. I'm super adaptable. I'm a very safe pair of hands in most environments. And I don't like that about myself. I want to be an artist. I don't want to play to everyone. I constantly am striving to be more true, more me, more just this little naked wriggling person that I am inside. That's what it is. And if you don't like it, to hell with you, because it's for the people who do like it. Like with my podcast, I could ask less intelligent questions, inject a load of bonhomie and chat, and make it more, inverted commas, mainstream. What would be the fucking point of that? I think that's one of the biggest... I'm just realising this as I'm saying it. I think that's one of the biggest favours the podcast has done me. People are forever asking what I've learned from it. Like, did you learn a particular writing technique or a particular joke construction? What I really learned is, if I do a thing that's really important and meaningful to me and put it out there, eventually other people who share my values will connect with me.
Yeah.
And that's what I aspire to do with my stand-up. It's just that the means of putting the stuff out there, driving to Salisbury, doing a show, and then driving back to 100 people is not a very efficient way of doing it. So at the moment, I'm trying to work out what is... Like, I'd love to be able to do stand-up just on the internet, but you can't because the audience aren't there. So then it's clips of stand-up, and that doesn't seem very innovative. So I don't know what the answer is at the moment. But the idea of work to, do what you, as a stand-up, the only thing I'd say to people, really, is don't take advice from anyone. And here's my advice. Do what makes you laugh. And it's so fucking easy to say and so hard to do. If you do what makes you laugh. I have a joke from years ago that I tried to make work for years, left it, and then eventually got it to work in a show, which is that in a supermarket checkout, I like to open the egg box. When the cashier opens the egg box to check the eggs are okay, I like to lean in and go, "All right, lads." I just like it. It's silly. It makes me laugh. Everything about that makes me laugh. I couldn't ever make it work on stage, and then I eventually learned to make it work on stage, and I'm so proud of it because that picks up an audience and invites them into this silly, tiny little example. It's not like a big bit or anything, but to have made that work, to have managed to convince an audience, to have managed to express what I find funny about an idea in such a way that other people can also find it funny, to invite them in, to have articulated it sufficiently. I'm saying this in a way that you get what I think's funny about that, and I've convinced you it's funny as well. I really like that.
Because I think it's, and I realise I am sort of just unloading a lot of my own
People do that to me all the time, and I love it. It's fine. Go ahead.
But I think with my films that I've made, I'm sort of. So I made a comedy short film as my graduate, and we took it to festivals around the UK and stuff. And I was quite happy to just, if the room didn't get it, I was happy enough in myself with the film that I'd be like, well, I knew what the problems were.
Yeah.
I knew what my problems were with it, but I was happy enough to go, well, that just wasn't for them, and they. But starting to do stand-up gigs and doing something, and obviously it's different because I've not done a lot of stand-up, right? So I've got to accept that some of it is also just that I'm not that funny yet on stage. But I always used to think that stand-ups who say, "Oh, it just wasn't my room tonight," I always thought, is that a bit of a cop-out?
You're not allowed to say that until you've done 1,000 gigs.
I can't say
Until you've done
that.
1,000 gigs, it's always you, not them.
Yeah.
Once you've done 1,000 gigs, I've plucked that number out of the air, but I'm sticking with it. Once you've done 1,000, you're allowed to go. Sometimes it is just them. It's just you can only say that from a point of view of experience.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah, no, sure. I wasn't suggesting that I could say
No,
that.
I didn't mean to suggest otherwise.
But yeah, I always thought that was like a cop-out thing to say. But then to hear you say about how you can't bend just to the will of. That's interesting to hear.
Sure. I mean, I'm not saying I'm right, but that is what I think.
Yeah.
There are plenty of way more successful, famous, and richer comics than me. More successful, famous, richer, or more internet famous than me. Plenty of them who wouldn't necessarily have that opinion. I'm just telling you what I think.
Yeah.
My profile is negligible, arguably. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not a big TV act. I'm internet famous a little bit. because of the
Podcasting
Podcasting titan. But I'm not like my DVD on YouTube hasn't had 100,000 downloads. It's had 10,000 downloads. You know what I mean? That's arguably impressive in one way. But at the end of the day, it's art. I think it's art, and maybe that's cowardice on my part. But I just think it's art. I'm doing what I do. I'm the one that has to do it, so I might as well do what makes me happy.
Yeah.
So I have this weird sensibility where I'm like, I naturally look and sound like quite a mainstream person. I feel very much like an outsider artist, you know. I don't know. I mean, maybe we all do, but. I think I feel like I've earned the right to say I'm not going to slow down and take everyone with me. I definitely think that you need, in order that we have geniuses, we have to, in order that we create fertile ground with which to grow geniuses, it's part of my job as the host of the Comedian podcast to reassure people that failure is okay, and learning to live in and with failure can be the breeding ground for some of your best work. Now, that's a hard message to articulate and a confusing one to listen to, and I do worry sometimes that I create comedians through the show. I nudge people into comedy who aren't necessarily very good at it. Ultimately, you do need to end up with the whole room are killing themselves laughing. It's just that to get there, it's fine for them to be quiet for a long time. I'm not saying you can go out, never get any laughs and call yourself an artistic comedian. But equally, I'm sure some people did that for years and then cracked it and now are the best people. You know, there is just, it's art and it's weird and random and scary, and there's no right answers and there's no formula. And there are formulaic things you can do, but the more of them you do, the more you turn into a lounge singer.
So there you have it, Stuart Goldsmith. My thanks to Stuart for taking part in the show. My thanks to you, the listener, for joining me on this wonderful journey that is the podcast world. And I hope to see you again next time when I will be talking to none other than Richard Porter. Me and Richard had a very long but very interesting conversation. So the debate over here at Last Line Towers, we don't have towers, is whether to split it up into two parts or to release a sort of 2.5 hour long podcast. I'm reluctant to do the latter, as I generally like to keep the podcast around an hour. I know we have gone over a couple of times, but I want it to be easy for people to listen to on their commute or whatever, and generally an hour is a good length. I'm always sort of bewildered by podcasts that go into like the 3-hour territory. Although I did listen to a very good podcast today that was 3.5 hours long. But it was about Star Wars: The Phantom Menace. So, sometimes you got to do these things. But that is for me to decide and for you to find out when the episodes go out. But I do hope you join me for those. And thank you again for listening. If you'd like to support the show, then please go to patreon.com/thelastline. Hey, it'd be appreciated. And if you want to go and follow me on all the social media platforms, then they're all in the description of this podcast. That's it from me for now. So until next time, I've been James Alban, and this is The Last Line.